started back in about 2017, early, mid, depends on who you talk to, by a group of folks who had a great time doing national parks on the air and were very sorry to see it go. It was one of the more successful things the ARRL has done in a number of years, and it was really sad to see it come to an end. So they spun up this Parks on the Air program with really one primary goal, and that is to have fun. If anybody says, why in the world would you do Parks on the Air? The answer to that question is because it's fun. Yes, ham radio has an emergency preparedness aspect to it and a civil service aspect to it and learning aspects, and all of those are wonderful things. But in the end, most of the time, ham radio is a hobby, and hobbies are supposed to be entertaining. Well, POTA is most definitely entertaining. I have a couple of parks that have thousands of contacts. I just got my award for hunting my 2000th unique park, and it never gets old. The activators are always glad to hear from you, no matter how many times they've done it. Being on what I call the right side of the pileup never gets old. If your only exposure to operating in a sort of a zoo when ham radio is real busy is field day, you've gotten a small sliver of how good it really could be. And I think POTA is really the best way to experience that. Unfortunately, it's easy. It's not that difficult to get involved in Parks on the Air. Quite frankly, some of you have probably done it and don't even know you did it. If you were spinning the VFO and you heard someone calling CQ and you answered them back, and they gave you some bizarre number that you didn't understand, you probably just worked a POTA activator. So you've participated with no training and no sign up and nothing to log and nothing to submit. Being a hunter is no more complicated than operating in your shack the way you do all of the time. And then when you are ready to go out and activate, that does not have to be terribly complicated either. There are those of us who take some perverse joy in making everything as difficult as it could possibly be. But normal people frequently will make just use of what they have. There's a large number of activators who go out and work POTA parks using a mobile rig. Their portable setup is they drove to the park. It doesn't really have to be any more complicated than that. And then the bonus that applies to everybody, I have the luxury of living kind of out in the country, a couple of acres, not a whole lot of RFI. I'm one of those people who doesn't understand why they say verticals are noisy, because mine's not. Having said that, the conditions are still almost always better when I get to the park. The last activation I did, I had the preamp turned on 40 meters because the noise floor was S0. There was nothing. There was no noise in the park at all. It was a beautiful thing. And of course, the surroundings are beautiful too. I like looking at my shack. I think I did a great job building it and organizing it and whatever, but let's be honest, it's LEDs with a beige wall behind it. The scenery at the park is decidedly better. And then the fourth thing I'll try and entice you with is the award system. Now, I understand that not everybody is a paper chaser, and that's okay. POTA provides a very rich award system. There's lots and lots and lots of ways to track your progress, but the only person you can compete against is yourself. POTA is not a contest. Contests have start times and end times and fixed exchanges, and when it's over, somebody wins. None of that is true of POTA. There's a little bit of friendly co-opetition that goes on, particularly within the local club. Whose POTA stats are what is a great topic of conversation on the repeater. But you will find as you get out there that every single person in the POTA program is ready, willing, and able to help you, because in the end, our goal is for everybody to unlock all of the achievements. And if someday we have the problem of all of the awards have been given to everybody, well, that'll be fine and dandy. That'll be just a great challenge to come up with the next litmus test. Okay, let me back up just a half a second here. I've been throwing some POTA terms around like everybody knows them. Fortunately, there aren't a whole lot. there are realistically, there's two people mostly involved in a QSO. And those two people are going to be in two different places. The activator is what we call the person who's in the park. So they've got whatever their portable setup is, whether it's the mobile rig in their car, or it's a backpack thing, or it's a Go Box, or however they get their radio to the park, they're in the park. And that really is the only hard and fast rule for activators, is that you must be in the park. If there is a hard part of activating POTA, it's figuring out where the boundaries of the park are. Provide as much guidance on that as we can, but the reality is, depending on whether it's a state park or a federal park or part of the trail system, it can be daunting to find the official boundaries of the park. So, but that and you're going to have to submit logs. It's pretty much the only thing you need to know to be an activator. And as we've discussed earlier, being a hunter is even simpler. You can be anywhere. You can be running your rig over a remote connection. You can be at home. You could be mobile. You could also be in a park and just decide, I'm just going to hunt today. It does not really matter where you are. And the rules are pretty simple too. For a hunter, I don't want to say there aren't any rules, because obviously there are rules, but there aren't any POTA specific rules. There's nothing that you have to do for POTA that's unique to POTA. You obviously have to follow Part 97, nothing illegal, and it is part of the posted POTA rules, that, officially the terms and conditions for your POTA account, that you will follow the DX Code of Conduct. If you haven't read that, it's a short, but it's a very good read. 10 or 11 bullet points that are, quite honestly, things that anybody with any common sense could probably figure out, like, please don't tune up your kilowatt Viking 2 in the middle of the pileup. Real complicated stuff like that. That all pretty much boils down to the golden rule. Don't do things to other people that you really wouldn't appreciate having done to you. For the activators, there's a couple of things. Activators do have to have a POTA account. I guess I didn't mention it explicitly, but you could, in theory, hunt POTA without even bothering to create a POTA account. It makes it a little difficult to track your stats, but it's possible. Not so for the activators. They're going to have an account, really only because they're going to have to submit logs. And we have some training material on what needs to go into your logs. They're real simple. We tried to keep it as basic as possible. But as long as you and your stuff were in the park and you get your logs right, you're pretty much good to go as an activator. We have all this stuff documented online. The parksontheair.com domain is the original sort of POTA domain, and it's still there and it's not going anywhere. And it's where all of the training material is posted under help and getting started. And it's where the rules are. Everything else has been migrated over to the new POTA.app site. And do note that that's still a website. So even if you're on a mobile device, you're going to go there in Safari or Chrome or whatever browser you happen to use to the web address POTA.app. If you're in the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store and you're looking for the POTA app, I'd like to say you won't find it. It's worse than that. You will find some stuff labeled POTA apps, none of which come from the POTA team, none of which are sanctioned. If you have one of those, quite honestly, what we ask is that you delete it, because it was done without anyone's knowledge or blessing. The website is a mobile-first design. It works great pretty much everywhere, and that's where the spotting page is, and we'll talk about what's there a little bit. But POTA.app is actually probably your starting point for the official POTA resources. There are two other resources online that are not managed by the POTA staff that are social networking type communities. We have a group on Slack, and the group on Slack is where most of the business of POTA takes place. That's where you'll find the developers. That's where you'll find the discussion of what should or shouldn't be on the website. There's a help channel in there. There's all kinds of administrivia type stuff, as well as a couple of good discussions and the POTA swap meet. If you're interested in used POTA gear, all that stuff is on Slack. There is also a Facebook group And I will say this, usually anytime you talk about Facebook, you can feel the eyes rolling in the crowd, and more sympathetic I could not be. The POTA Facebook is sort of the rose amongst the thorns, as it were. There's a lot of people in there, and yeah, you know, you bring up antennas and it's a bunch of hams. You ask 5 people, you get 9 answers. You do have those discussions, but by and large, the POTA Facebook group is a wonderful place. It's the kind of thing that makes you go, you know, gosh, if all of Facebook was like this, maybe it would be okay. So I would encourage, just like we encourage new hams to join ham radio clubs for Elmering and mentoring and just general inspiration, I would encourage you to venture into the waters of the POTA communities, just getting started, because there really is, there's a lot of just good energy there. All right, day in the life of a POTA activator is pretty straightforward. You're generally going to start out by going to the POTA.app website and looking at the map. And the map has all these yellow dots over it that show you where the parks are that are part of the POTA system. Now, people ask all the time, do I have to go to where the yellow dot is? Absolutely not. If you go to Yellowstone, there's one yellow dot somewhere in the middle of Yellowstone. You can go anywhere in Yellowstone. The Appalachian Trail is a POTA park. It spans 13 states. You certainly do not have to go to where the dot is. But for mapping purposes, it gives you sort of a general idea of what is probably somewhere near where you are. Once you've picked the park you want to go to, we encourage people to go to the scheduling page and list their activation, as this will happen in the future. This is not an absolute requirement. You can be driving past a park and go, hey, look, a park, and pull in and activate, no problem. But having an activation on the schedule gives you a couple of additional capabilities that I'll talk about here in a minute when it comes to spotting. And it helps people to plan, because not everybody can spend every waking minute in their shack. There are folks who have to juggle when they're going to do the laundry, cut the grass, and play radio. And being able to have a schedule of when people plan to activate, you know, lets them arrange their priorities. So we encourage it, even though it's not totally required. You're going to pack up your stuff after having tested it at home and hopefully making a checklist of the stuff you want to bring, and take your station to the park and set it up. Now, to me, this is, it's hard for me to say what's the most fun part of POTA, but you'll hear me say more than once in this presentation, you know, we're hams and we like to play with our toys, and I'm no exception. I really enjoy the process of whittling my POTA station down to the bare essentials and the best way to pack it, and the fastest way to set it up and tear it down, but also still the most effective station I can have when I get there, within the confines of, we have to be considerate of the fact that we're using public space. Among its other many wonderful redeeming qualities, has proven to be a great ambassadorship for ham radio. More than half of my activations, more than half of my activations when the weather's okay. When I go out in the snow, I generally get to sit there by myself. But as the weather gets nice, more and more people are going to come up to me and say, what are you doing? And it gives me a chance to explain to them that ham radio has not, in fact, gone the way of the dodo bird. And you know, it's not all, as my buddy in New Zealand would, pensioners in their basement. It's a vibrant thing that people actually go out and do. And it's a wonderful chance to make a good impression on the public, as long as your station isn't taking up like an entire pavilion that a family wanted to use, or, you know, somebody's kid just tripped over your radials, or you get where I'm going with this. You got to mind the fact that not everybody's a ham, and the kind of stuff that you see, like when a club goes out and does field day, is probably not going to garner anything but same kind of looks the teenagers with the loud stereos get when they go through the park. So we follow the hiker's creed of leave no trace, and we try to be sort of minimal footprint. While once you get set up, you're going to get yourself on the spotting page, hopefully. That's going to require that you either have cellular internet service, or that you put your activation on the schedule and know how to use CW to get yourself onto the spotting page via the Beacon network. Or there is a burgeoning thing where and it is sort of a Rube Goldberg machine here, but you can use JS call to send a message that ends up in an APRS gateway that ultimately gets you on the spotting page. That's going to be like a whole training video topic on itself. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but the point is you get on the spotting page, because as soon as you get on the spotting page, you are going to be on what I call the right side of the pileup. If you build it, they will come. And boy, will they come. The last activation, I was out there for 22 minutes. I was on my lunch hour, and it took me, time to get to the park, set up, whatever. I was left with ish minutes to activate. I came home with 68 contacts in the log, and that's on 20 meters. They will come if you get on that spotting page. So you rack up your contacts, you QSO until you can't feel your throat anymore, or you have to go home because it's getting dark or whatever. And then you pack up your logs and send them into the program. Right now, that's a real simple email thing. And in the future, it's going to be an even simpler web upload. We're this close to self-service log uploads. And then you just sit back and wait for the awards to roll in. This is out of date now. That's Western Prairie Fringed Orchid. Jason Johnson is our program administrator, and his wife came up with the theme for all of the POTA achievements and did all the design work. She did an excellent job, but she has a passion for endangered plant species. So if you wondered where the names of these things come from, that's where it is. Happy wife, happy life. So we get endangered species. It's all good. How do you get those QSOs? Well, POTA is pretty generous when it comes to a QSO. Any unique combination of the big five. So obviously, if it's a new day where you work a new call sign, or you change band or mode, or you go to a new park, change any one of those things, and you have a new QSO. The thing that's a little bit unique about POTA is that, yes, obviously we recognize what you think of as different modes, the contest modes of phone, CW, and digital. But as it turns out, POTA really will allow any change of mode to count as a new QSO. So whereas in a typical contest, AM, FM, and sideband would all just be considered phone, well, in POTA, those are three separate modes. Because again, not a contest. Our goal is for people to have fun and to get out there and to try stuff and experiment with it. And it just makes no sense to put some position where they want to try AM. They've been running all sideband, and they go, hey, you know what? I've never even pushed the AM button on this radio. Let me see what happens. Only disappointed because they work for the same people that they worked sideband. Like, no, we'll count them. If you can, anybody who thinks it's the same, working AM and sideband hasn't tried it. And the same for the digital modes. POTA counts all these digital modes as different modes, as different QSOs. And again, I would put it out there if anybody who's under the impression that, well, that's not really fair. You could just sit there and drill through them and rack up a bunch of QSOs with the same guy. Good luck. It's harder than you might think. It's at least as hard as turning your VFO from 20 to 40 meters. So there's that. I've talked a lot about activators, and I do that only because there's sort of more things to talk about. Being a hunter is so simple that it doesn't really require a lot of explanation. But I certainly don't want to short the hunter role in any way, shape, or form. The vast majority of the people in the POTA program are hunters. Almost everybody in the program hunts at least some, and the vast majority of people only hunt. It's a very important role. The program doesn't work without hunters. No, if you can imagine, you put in all the effort to go out to a park and you set up and you call CQ and you get crickets. That's a bad day. So we would encourage all of you, pull up the spotting page. Just go to POTA.app, pull up the spotting page, see who's out there, spin the VFO, and drop your call sign on them. That's all it takes to get started. And I'm relatively confident that if you do that a couple of times, you start to meet some of the people in the program. It kind of sells itself. So anyway, that that spotting page is at POTA.app, along with where do I go to get signed up? Where's the frequently asked questions document, the map, pretty much everything is available at POTA.app. If you need to be redirected over to the Parks on the Air website, or the POTA.app thing will send you there. And then, of course, the social communities are available for folks who just want to meet some like-minded or nice people. Okay. I want to take a break there. That's the nuts and bolts of POTA, the program. There's really not much more to say about how the program works, although I'm happy to take questions on POTA itself at this point. I have a few more things to talk about the stations and the equipment that are sort of typical at a POTA activation. But if I ramble on too much, either people fall asleep or they forget their question. So we'll take a pause here and see if anybody wants to interject anything. Plus, I need some water.
W9R.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
So I threw it at you at the, let me get my video going here. I threw it at you in the chat, and I'm kind of curious about how many activations or how many contacts does one need for it to count as an activation? I saw the last time it was 10. Does that still hold?
Yeah, so there's a concept of an attempt, which happens with a single QSO. If you make one contact and submit a log, which if you do make even one contact, you're expected to submit a log so that the hunters will get credit for it. And it'll get recorded as an attempt. To be recorded as an activation, yeah, you need to get at least to 10 QSOs over the course of the UTC day. I try to refrain from using either the words successful or failed. They don't actually appear anywhere in the POTA documentation. There's an attempt and there's an activation, and the line between the two is between 9 and 10 QSOs. But quite honestly, if you made it to the park, set up your radio, and talk to anybody, that's a success, because you will have had fun. Anyone else?
Yes, I'd like to ask a question, please.
Sure.
My name is Martin. My call sign is November 6th, Queen Lima Hotel. I live in Los Angeles, and I really like this Parks on the Air, and I had 2 hunters. It's really enjoyable. I wanted to ask about the format of the logs. Are you planning on having other formats that are easier to upload, or it seems like it's a little bit of an involved process to upload a log, and what are your plans for using other formats?
No, we're sticking with the ADI format because that's the only one for which there's really a good spec. And we just, I don't know when's the last time you looked at it, but we went live with the self-upload tool for the logs a couple of 2 or 3 months ago. And then now there is the page where you can directly enter the QSOs into the POTA system. You don't actually have to create an ADI file at all. You can log on paper and just go to the website and put them into the website one at a time versus trying to put them into some piece of software and skip the file altogether.
That's probably what I'll do. I just wanted to ask about that. This is a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Happy to do it. POTA has given me a lot, and it's nice to be able to at least attempt to do something back.
It's really excellent. Thank you. Everybody wants to be a hunter.
Well, almost everyone starts as a hunter. We do have, there's always that one guy that decides to just jump. Oh, I think I know what POTA is. Let me run out and activate. And some have success. Some get home and find out they should have read the manual first. But it's like anything else.
Thank you.
I have a quick story about how I got started activating.
Yeah.
I'm Ron Larson from Eau Claire, Wisconsin, W9RLL. I was going down to Pensacola in between March and April for a reunion of the Navy squadron I was in, and I was visiting on the way. And Vicksburg's got a terrific military national park there, so I decided to visit that. And as I'm coming out of the welcome thing, I looked at the car right next to me, and it was KB4MD. And I go, well, I can't talk to him now because I don't know where it is. But if I see him in a park anywhere, pulled over, I'm going to stop and talk to him. And I did. And then what he was telling me is that's what he was doing at the park. And I said, well, if you need a hand in any way, I'm your guy, you know. And he says, well, let's go. So we went down to where where a ship or a paddle boat they had put up there from that Civil War battle, and because it had picnic tables and restrooms. And he set everything up, and I kind of watched him, and he taught me, and he got started. And as soon as he made a QSO, he would tell the guy he says, I got a good deal for you today. You're getting 2 for the price of 1 because I have another operator. And he handed the mic to me. And we went through every one of those. When he got done, he had it in his computer. He had all the log and all that. He says, once I update it, I will go in my log, change all my calls and put all your calls in there because at the same time, and I'll give you the log and you can update it. And I'm going, I never even thought about activating, but God, I've been working now on what I need to do, how I need to set something up to do that, because it got me enthused about it.
Yeah, no, that's great. I hear similar stories a lot, and I'll speak for 27,000 other people. Well, maybe it's more like 3,000. I have never met a POTA activator who wasn't thrilled at the opportunity to share the joy of activating with a fellow ham. So if you want to have that sort of mentored experience, you'd like to go with somebody your first time or your first 5 times or whatever else, I would strongly encourage you to get on the Facebook group and just say, hey, I'm in this general area. If you're a POTA person and you're going out anywhere near me, or if you have travel plans, just whatever, there's enough activators and there's enough activators who are always looking for someplace new to go that we can almost guaranteed find somebody to help you through it. So, and now that I got the chat up here, I saw, POTA.app. The website this is why there's not an app in the app stores, is the website itself is sort of mobile first. It works great on your computer, but it also works great on your Android or iPhone. And question, is being in the park an absolute? The in the park in caps. Yes, I'm afraid that it is. If you run into a situation where, for whatever reason, the parking lot is, maybe it's a municipal lot and it's across the street from the park or something like that, that is not going to count. The only exception to the thou shalt be in the park, you and all your stuff, is this idea of trails. So we didn't really want people camped out in the middle of the Appalachian Trail and blocking the thing. So the rule for trails is within 100 feet of the trail or a trail head, so that you're not blocking it. But yes, for parks, and not just like a tow in the park. It's you and all of your equipment completely and totally inside the boundary of the park. Now, have we had occasions where somebody thought that was the case and found out later they missed it by 50 feet? Yes. Though all those activations are still in the database. You know, live and learn, don't do it again. Rule number 1, this is a hobby, it's supposed to be fun. So there are no POTA police. There are no real POTA police. There are a few imagined POTA police, but there's nobody who's actually going to come and do anything about it. So use your best judgment there. And yes, POTA does work with VHF, UHF, SHF, whatever. You can go as high as you want in frequency. Obviously, because all of the QSOs have to be simplex, with the exception of satellite-based repeaters. We do allow satellite QSOs to count as POTA QSOs. That is the only repeater that is allowed. No terrestrial repeaters for POTA QSOs. So your 2 meter, your 220, your 440, whatever frequency you want to use, has to be simplex for it to count as a POTA QSO. But there are lots of opportunities where POTA and SOTA coincide. Go to the top of the mountain and the summit happens to be a park. So you can get 2 activations and probably a lot of 2 meter contacts that way. And there's no distance requirement on these things. So if you're hurting for QSOs, bring a buddy or 2 with you to the park, and everybody bring your dual bander and work each other while you're there. That counts. What can I tell you? Okay, so with that, if anybody thinks of any other questions, feel free to interrupt or drop them in the chat. I'll try and keep an eye on that. But I'm going to go ahead in the interest of time and move on here to a quick little bit about the POTA stations. Now, I already mentioned that our sort of number one criteria here is to put a good face on ham radio. So we try and keep it manageable. But with that, there's a couple of things you're probably going to need. You're going to need power. You're going to need a radio and an antenna. And it might, depending on what you're trying to do, be handy for you to have a compute device of some kind. So we'll just run through these real quickly. Power, you'd be amazed at how often 120 volt AC power is available. A lot of park pavilions have 120 volt power. If you are camping in a park, which by the way is a fantastic way to be in the park legally after the park is otherwise closed to visitors. Pennsylvania State Park system is open dusk to dawn, or dawn to dusk every day, unless you're camping. If you're in the campground, obviously you can stay there overnight. And in the campground, you know ahead of time whether you got a campsite with power or not. The Plan B, I mentioned generators. Almost nobody uses generators, with the exception of if they happen to be like in an RV park where everybody has a generator, or they're out in some BLM land and there's nobody around for 500 miles or whatever else. There are times and places where generators are perfectly fine. But for the most part, they're sort of considered the power of last resort as POTA activations go. Where you're going to find most of the happy people is in the world of batteries. And specifically these days, the world of lithium iron phosphate batteries. We sometime in the last 6 or 8 months crossed a threshold where lithium iron phosphate batteries are no longer more expensive than deep cycle lead acid batteries, even to buy up front. They've always been cheaper to own long term because they cycle thousands of times instead of hundreds. But they're not even more expensive to buy them up front these days. So 99%, a big percentage, pretty much everybody except the people who already had a lead acid battery, so you just go ahead and live with it, is using lithium iron phosphate these days. And it's not primarily because of the weight. It's primarily because a lead acid battery starts at 12 volts and drops down into the 11s pretty quickly. A lithium iron phosphate starts at 12.8 and stays there. Your radio is much happier on that lithium iron phosphate battery. We do have a small but dedicated group of solar enthusiasts in POTA. So if you like the idea of making QSOs, but you also are into playing with solar power, you will find some of your people in the POTA crowd. Me personally, I like simple and I'm pretty lazy. So when I wanted more power, I just got a second battery. But the solar crowd sure has a lot of fun. So you're going to want something to run that power into. You're going to want a radio. And the good news for POTA is that realistically anything is going to work. Any radio that functions will work for parks on the air. I haven't yet actually seen anybody attempting to run vacuum tubes off of a battery. But other than that, if your radio functions, it will work for POTA. There are a couple of things that are nice to have. They're really the same things that are nice to have in radios, sort of across the board. I will say that tuners they don't have to be humongous, but they're really, really handy, because even if you have resonant antennas, when you build them at home, you often find out in a portable situation, you're not deploying that wire as high as you thought you were, or as straight as you did the last time, or this tree has wetter sap in it than the last tree had. And so oftentimes some touch-up tuning is really handy. But otherwise, I've got a Yaesu FT100 that something's gone wrong, something gone haywire in the SWR bridge. If I try to put it on anything higher than 20 meters, it's convinced it has like an 80-to-1 SWR. But for whatever reason, it still works fine on 20 and 40. And that's good enough to get POTA done. So all else being equal, more effective radiated power will make you more QSOs. However, we have a dedicated QRP bunch as well. And the QRP folks who are in a good location with a good antenna generally do as well as the folks who have 100 watts into mostly an infrared generating loading coil down in a hole somewhere. So to each their own. I own all three of the radios that are on this slide. I've used them all for POTA. I like them all for POTA any given day. If I could give you one really actually useful piece of advice about a radio for POTA, it's that remember that you're taking this radio portable and outside. And so take a radio where you're going to be comfortable doing that. I offered a guy in my local club wanted to come along on a POTA activation. I said, sure. He pulled up and opened the back door of his car and got, I swear, the UPS had just delivered the box from DX Engineering. It was a brand spanking new ICOM 7610. And he got this thing out of his car and set it down on the picnic table and proceeded to go like this for the whole next hour. He was just, what's that bug doing? Is that a cloud? Like, did you feel a drop? He was terrified that something bad was going to happen to that brand new expensive radio. And so therefore, he didn't have fun. He made a lot of contacts, but he has since invested in a secondhand 891 and is having a lot more fun and frankly, making the same number of contacts. You're going to need an antenna. And again here, anything will work. Y'all have most likely been around ham radio to know the way this works is if you ask 4 hams about antennas, you will get at least 7 answers. And varying degrees of quality and applicability to the question you asked. That's great. That's part of the fun of the hobby is having those whiteboard conversations. But definitely don't let perfect be the enemy of good, is what it says on the slide, because there is no unicorn. There is no antenna that's going to work all the time the best for everything. It's going to depend what your park conditions are. It's going to depend on the RF conditions. It's going to depend who you're trying to talk to, what is going to be a better or worse antenna. All I can tell you for sure is that the antenna that you take to the park and set up and put RF into makes more QSOs than the one you're talking about on Facebook. Beyond that, it's going to be up to you to play with it. There are going to be different things that are going to matter to you when you're talking about an antenna for POTA than some of the things that you're accustomed to thinking about. When you're at home, footprint it matters, but not like it does at the park. When you're at home, it's a good weekend project to put up a new antenna, sometimes multiple weekends. And you're fine with that because you hope this antenna is up for 5 or 10 years. An antenna you're going to put up at the park, if it takes you a half an hour to set it up and a half an hour to tear it down, and you only had an hour to activate, guess what you spent your whole time doing? You might care about takeoff angle, depends on the terrain of the park. And you probably don't care whether your antenna is pretty, whether it can handle a kilowatt, or if it's going to survive the next 3 winters. None of those things matter for an antenna that you only plan to have up for an hour and a half. So it's different, a different set of criteria, and your spouse doesn't have to. You don't have to care if your spouse thinks it's ugly, because they don't have to look at it. Couple of real popular choices. I broke them down into sort of categories. For the folks who are really, really into like leave no trace, don't touch anything at the park, don't use any trees, don't drive any stakes, just set your antenna there and use it. The ones that sort of come on their own tripod are real popular. From left to right, that is what's known as a Wolf River coil, which is nothing more than a telescopic whip that you can telescope or not, depending on the band, and a coil with a collar that you can move up and down to change the loading inductance. It's a vertical. It requires radials like every other vertical, but it does have a pretty small footprint. In the middle there is the buddy pole. That's the buddy pole might be the most divisive antenna in the whole group. There are people who love their buddy poles and people who don't know how the buddy pole folks sleep at night. So do what you do you. And then the magnetic loop, there are very, very few people using magnetic loops. However, there are some very noteworthy folks using magnetic loops, namely most of the people who do activations down on the National Mall. So the magnetic loop is not an efficient antenna by any stretch of the imagination. It is mostly an infrared generator, but it has a small form factor, a small footprint, including no radials. And so if you are trying to set up outside of the Lincoln Memorial and not get arrested, something like a mag loop may be for you. I tend to fall into this other camp of the I'm part of the resonant big footprint antenna crowd. This antenna on the left is a linked dipole for everything 40 through 6, and then the DX Commander is essentially a fan dipole turned on its side. It's a vertical with different elements for the different bands, and being a vertical requires radials. These antennas, if you have the space to deploy them, are far more efficient than the compact loaded antennas. They may or may not take more time to set up. Again, you pays your money and you takes your choices. The linked dipole, if you make a linked dipole yourself, you might not have more than $10 worth of lamp cord in the thing. If you actually go out and purchase an Expedition model DX Commander, you're going to be in good company with the buddy pole folks. So again, what I really sort of wanted to just contrast here was there's people operating at sort of both ends of the efficiency spectrum with the compact antennas and with full size antennas. And honestly, the RF performance of these antennas has almost nothing to do with the decision-making process. It's almost entirely driven by logistics of the rules in the parks you operate in and how much time do you have and how much space do you have. The sort of the compromise in the middle, probably the most popular POTA antenna is the end-fed half wave. Some people have, like me, have access to trees to deploy these antennas. Others choose to go with the fiberglass pole, 10-meter mast or 12-meter spider beam, whatever, to put them up. When I took this picture, I had my end-fed half wave cut for 80 meters. That was a farce, because nobody has room for an 80-meter half wave in a park. It is now a 40-meter end-fed half wave, and it frankly works better. And the one in the middle is a quote-unquote random wire. Terrible, terrible name for an antenna. That is a very, very carefully selected random length of wire, and it's 9-to-1 unon. It has the advantage of being absolutely the smallest. That's the shortest piece of wire that I can get on 40 meters. And then my high-tech beanbag and rope for deploying these antennas in the trees. Again, that's a sort of a touchy subject. When you talk to folks who live in certain states that really, really, really like to have lots and lots and lots of rules for their parks, they freak out when you tell them you're using a tree for your antenna. Around here, I have had the park ranger throw the rope up in the tree for me because they thought it looked like fun. So know where you are and what's going to be okay for you. Then finally, the computers, we talked about logging. I personally really, really like computer-based logging. I like having the computer connected to the radio so that I don't have to remember to put in the band and the mode. I don't have to remember to write down the time. I don't have to remember what power setting I was on. The computer and the radio just sort all that out for me. And then if you want to operate digital modes, again, not all digital modes. CW obviously doesn't require a computer, and you'll run into the occasional radio that has something like PSK or RIDI built into it. But for the most part, if you want to run FT8, you probably want a computer. It's very, very difficult to whistle those tones at the right timing and actually make a QSO. So I will warn you that computers can be a little finicky out in the field. We don't typically have the real good solid grounds that we all have in our home shack, right? So RFI can be a thing, especially if you're using some sort of a non-resonant antenna architecture. I take that end-fed random wire out with my QRP rig. I'm only putting 5 watts into it, and it still generates enough common mode current on the coax that my keyboard dies every time I try to use it. So it's paper logging for the QRP setup. The computers themselves are far, far more durable than they used to be, especially if you get into tablet form factors. Most laptops don't have any moving parts except for maybe the occasional fan anymore. So the idea that somehow the computer is less reliable than paper, our help desk tickets actually don't bear that out. We've had more mistakes made with paper logs than e-logs that were lost. But they can be persnickety, and if nothing else, they're going to burn precious electrons that you had to carry there in your little red wagon or on your back or whatever. So last thing I'll leave you with is POTA is very simple, but it's like anything else, it still pays to learn it in pieces and in steps. If you want to go out and do an activation, I would strongly suggest that you do a little bit of hunting first, just to kind of get familiar with how things typically go. Again, no fixed exchange for POTA. It's your activation. Run it the way you want. But a little experience is a good thing. Definitely set up your portable kit in your backyard before you take it to the park. Do a little hunting with it. Make yourself a checklist. Make sure you've got everything, especially if the park is some distance away. Like, I'm going to suggest you start as close to home as you can, but let's face it, as close as possible is sometimes an hour and a half for some folks. And if that's the case for you, you're gonna hate yourself if you drive that hour and a half thinking you're going to do a POTA activation and find out you don't have your coax with you. So with that, that is the end of the slides. I'll say thanks for putting up with me here for this time, and then let's go back to, if anybody has any questions, let's get those all answered.
Barry, what's it look like in chat?
Chat has all been taken care of.
Okay. It looks like you've done a darn good job here.
Well, you all do have the benefit of this has been rehearsed once or twice or 94 times or something like that. So I tried over the course of the last couple of years to work in slides for the most common questions that I got.
Okay.
But that's one of the beauties of ham radio, right? We get to learn from other folks' experience. We don't have to make all the mistakes ourselves.
That is people, and that's is amateur radio, and that's what makes it nice. Okay, anybody else? Well, with that in mind, and nobody asking questions, I will wrap this one up. Thank everybody for coming. It's been a great presentation. Really, really do appreciate that.
Happy to do it. Happy to do it. And if anybody has any questions, if you get into this, and if you don't want to get on the Facebook group or whatever, I'm good on QRZ. Feel free to send me an email, or 9 to 5. My water cooler is the local repeater, which happens to be on Echolink. So if you do Echolink, you can reach me during business hours at the N3TN, November 3 Tango November repeater node.
Okay. Water cooler. Okay, sounds good. One more time, any questions? Comments?
Thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you. It's been a great presentation.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Thank you now. 73 is
Have a great evening. Or 9 to 5, my water cooler is the local repeater, which happens to be on Echolink. So if you do Echolink, you can reach me during business hours at the N3TN, November 3 Tango November repeater node.
Okay. Water cooler. Okay, sounds good. One more time, any questions? Comments?
Thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you. It's been a great presentation.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Thank you now. 73 is
Have a great evening.